Well, we're back. So hopefully all this works again. Good morning, everybody. Chris Johnson here at Living Waters. We're here to talk about fly lines today, and I've got an awful large pile of them here on my desk. We're going to go through a lot about how they're made, what they do, and all that sort of good stuff. So we'll have a couple of links for you to follow in this. I figured out, and that's provided technology works. I'm going to fully admit that I am not the most technologically gifted person in the world. But that being said, the thing that I want to look at today is I actually have a couple of QR codes we're going to try that you can scan on your phone if you're doing this, or even if you watch it later. That'll take you to some scientific angler videos that we can link to. So we'll see if that works. And I tried it this morning and it worked, but that doesn't mean it's going to work this time. So we'll see what happens. If anybody has any questions, obviously leave them in the chat. I'll have that over here. So I've got screens all around me, but nonetheless, if you'll just drop those in the chat, I will do my very best to answer any questions that you may have. And obviously, I'll open it up for question and answer at the end of this as well. So to start out, fly lines. I mean, there's all different kinds and shapes and colors and tapers and all that sort of good stuff. How do you know which one to get, which one to use, what it does, and why you would use a certain line for a certain situation or condition? And those are things we're going to talk about today. So I think the first thing that we really have to look at is how a fly line is made, like what actually takes place. And we're going to be referencing this from a scientific angler standpoint. This is the only brand of fly lines we carry in store, and for good reason. It is the absolute best in the industry, in my opinion. And I mean, and again, this is my opinion, but I have used pretty much everything at this point, and I love these lines, man. I can't get past them. They're durable, they last, they hold up to our heat, they tolerate cold weather when we go out to the Mountain West or in Alaska, anything like that. Go down to the tropics, they hold up to that depending on what you're doing and where you're at, and just kind of matching your lines to the situation. But Scientific Angler, I just think, are unmatched for durability. And with the advent of AST Plus, we're seeing the lifespan of our lines even really outcompete anything that's out there, but they're beating their previous standard by a long shot. So it's really, really amazing to see what has taken place in fly lines over the last decade has been really impressive, but even beyond that. So we'll talk about floating lines, sinking lines, everything of the sort today. But the one thing I want to really stress today is if you do have questions, please ask them, because I don't know what everybody doesn't know. So, and after the fact, if you have anything, we'll try to monitor this on YouTube afterwards as well. So how they're made, what is a fly line made out of? So, I mean, obviously, if we bust one out of the box here, you see this real, just the color of the fly line there. It's kind of got that rubbery feel to it, or kind of that plasticky feel. Everybody's familiar that has fly fished before, that's kind of the general feeling of a fly line. But what makes that feel the way it does? Why are some lines a little bit stiffer? Why are some softer? Everything starts out on a core, and there's typically there's 3 different core types that scientific anglers use, and this is probably pretty similar across all fly line brands to some extent. And I would say this, there are certain cores for certain situations. A multi-filament core, which is kind of a braided material, is typically more softer, pliable, and it basically works as the skeleton of the fly line. If you want to kind of think about it as skin and bones, this is the bones side of it. This is the structural side of what gives a fly line its integrity. And so when you look at a core, you have to look at where you're going to be fishing it. So there's basically the multi-filament core that's going to be a little bit more flexible and going to be much better suited for moderate to colder conditions. When you start stepping up into hotter conditions or more demanding environments, you will see monocore fly lines. You will also see what's called tropicore, which is something that Scientific Angler uses, where it is actually an even stiffer material that still has a little bit of flexibility to it, obviously, but it's going to be made for the hottest of environments down in the tropics or the jungle, things like that, or in just blistering Texas heat on a boat deck. I mean, it doesn't get a whole lot hotter than that either. So I mean, it's made for those conditions and made to have integrity. If you were to take, for instance, I've got somewhere over here, if you were to take like this line here, this has got a multi-filament core. If you were to take this down to the tropics, it would cast like a wet noodle. It's not going to do the job that you need. It just simply does not have the stiffness to tolerate that sort of heat, and it just winds up getting more pliable, more limp, and to the point where if you take a cold water line into a tropical environment, and you like string a fly rod up, sometimes they're so limp you can actually see them kind of sag between the guides. So just make a note of when you travel different places, sometimes different lines are required depending on if you're going to have a major climate shift. I mean, I'm not going to use the same lines in Alaska that I use down in like Honduras or something like that, or down in, in the Amazon. I'm not going to go do that sort of stuff. You're looking for a totally different breed of fly line, and a lot of people are unfamiliar with that. So an 8-weight is not always an 8-weight that does 8-weight things everywhere. So it might be the same weight of fly line, but we have to think about fishing an 8-weight for salmon is going to be very different than fishing an 8-weight for permit and bonefish. Very, very different situation. And there's coatings, the outer coating of the line, that's kind of the skin portion of it, if you will, that can also take different degrees of stiffness. So there's, Scientific Anglers has a few different types of coatings that they will put on the outside of a fly line, depending on what they're actually trying to do. So there's basically what they call the goop, if you will. There's different kinds of goop suited for cold water environments, moderate environments, and then tropical and very hot water environments. Many of y'all that are probably watching this are familiar with the shop and know that I developed a line with Scientific Anglers recently called the Texas Taper. And it's available only through Living Waters Fly Fishing, so don't get on the website and go try to find it. It's only available through us, and we don't have an online store yet. It's coming one of these days, but until then, you can just call us. That being said, the Texas Taper, what was unique about it is instead of just using one type of goop that went over a core, I asked Scientific Anglers, can we blend two goops? Can we take a hot weather goop and a moderate weather goop and slam those together and make something that still has pliability but still has integrity in our Texas heat? And the verdict was it could work, and more than that, we have a fly line that is everything I could have ever wanted for our Texas environments, and I absolutely love it and have fished it like crazy in Colorado and New Mexico and Texas and all over the place. We've had some people field test it as far north as Alaska, and because it's on a multi-filament core, but it has a jacket or an outer coating that is going to be made of a blended kind of hot weather coating and kind of a moderate weather coating. When you blend those two together, it plays nice in a lot of different environments. So it is kind of a unique one-off situation within the SA lineup that we offer here in store. But if I was going to tropical environments, I want a very stiff core and a pretty robust, not as flexible jacket where it's going to have a little bit of stiffness to it, to where that outer coating is going to be a little stiffer, a little stronger, and it's going to turn over larger flies in demanding environments with bright sun, hot weather, humid conditions, all of that sort of stuff. When I'm in the mountains, for instance, even in the summers, I might wake up to upper 30s, lower 40s at elevation, and you don't want a tropical line for that. It's going to turn into a slinky. Those cores will have a lot of memory. The jacket doesn't have a lot of pliability compared to the cold weather equivalents. And so using an actual dedicated, trout line, if you will, is going to really help keep your lines more flexible and more manageable when you're in cooler weather temperatures. So if you buy a 6-weight for light wind days on the Texas coast, and you go take that same 6-weight up to the mountains to streamer fish, you're probably not going to enjoy it very much. If you take a line that's actually suited for those water temperatures and air temperatures, that's where the secret sauce is where you are actually matching everything to the rod that you're fishing, the environment that you're fishing, and the temperatures you're going to be around. So you have to think about it as kind of ambient environment, what actual water temperature you're going to be fishing in, what is the job you're going to be doing, and what rod are you going to be fishing that line with. Those four things really kind of make up how we select fly lines in store for our customers and for our personal usage. So all that being said, I know that's a lot of information, but that's kind of the general construction. So you have a core, and it's going to vary in stiffness. The hotter the condition, the stiffer the core. Colder, the more limp the core. The same thing on the outer coating or jacket. As you look at those, the goop, if you will, that is applied to that core will have different properties that allow it to perform effectively in a wide range of temperatures depending on what goop is placed on what core. So mixing and matching those is what the fly line manufacturers do to make lines for different conditions. Now, floating versus sinking. We obviously have a lot of different lines we're going to talk about today, and we'll go through them in pretty rapid fire fashion. But when you look at floating versus sinking, you can use, like for instance, Scientific Anglers uses microballoons, these little spherical air spheres that go into the line itself that actually enhance flotation and make that happen. You can also you can impregnate a line with tungsten to cause it to sink. However much or little of that you put in a line causes it to float or sink it, float higher or sink faster. There's also different agents that can go on the outside of the coatings. AST is one of those things, which was advanced shooting technology, and we can talk more about that. I think the one that I'm most excited about over the last several years has been AST Plus. It is literally an additive that is impregnated into the goop that goes on the cores, so that outer jack into the fly line. But as the line ages, it just continues to migrate outward, keeping that line feeling fresh and kind of that new, fresh out of box feel. AST Plus lines are just next level for me. I've never found anything that has that amount of durability with the amount of usage we put into these on the guide boats and then personal fishing and in a wide range of environment. It's a pretty incredible thing. So definitely worth mentioning that has been, I think, the largest breakthrough in fly lines in recent years, is having now additives that basically they can refresh themselves. It's really, really impressive what they've got there. So with that, if we were to bounce over here to a fly line, when you look at fly lines, this is just a typical Scientific Angler box. This is going to be an amplitude textured line. So that brings up another point of there are smooth fly lines and there are textured fly lines. There's even different kinds of textures. There's floating textures and there's, shooting textures. The floating textures are going to be a little bit more aggressive. They're typically going to be more diamond in shape. The shooting tapers are going to be like dimples on a golf ball, where they're not nearly as hard on your hands. So you look at an amplitude textured line, something like that is going to have that shooting texture in the back side of it. And you can actually see that in these little icons here. And I know that text might be a little small for you to see, but if you start looking at the technologies that are put forth in these lines, so you start looking at all these different little icons across the box, that'll tell you the different technologies that are built into that line. So you've got AST Plus, which we've spoken about. You have floating texture in the tip, which makes it a little bit more aggressive and floats up higher, but it's not the part of the line you will normally handle. You have the shooting texture, which causes it to shoot long distances and allow you to get the distance you need. It's also going to cause it, I even think it causes it to float a little higher because there's a little bit of air entrapment under it. You will also see, as you go down the list, you have line IDs, tactile reference points, and Tropicore. If you want to learn more about any of those, so all of those different technologies, if you want to learn anything more about that, and there's tons of information on this on Scientific Angler's website, I would highly encourage you to get on there and don't just read your fly line box. Get on the manufacturer's website. Go poke through that. I really encourage people to learn about it and really kind of dive into what makes a fly line a fly line. And all those technologies, the more of those little icons that are on a box, the more technology you will find in that fly line. Like in terms of, you're going to see the more of those icons, the more little special features are there, but it will elevate the price. And so those are things to look for when you're doing this. So excuse me there. Back to the actual fly line. If you were looking at this and you see, I think this is really where the rubber meets the road, is where we're looking at grain weights and tapers. Now, what is grain weight? If I flip the box over, and I know this text is really, really small, and you can access all of this information online as well, but if you look here, you'll see that there's different weights mentioned here. So this is actually the weight column that shows what weight there is. It tells you the actual head length, the total length of the fly line, and then it mentions grain weight. So what does it mean when you flip this box over and it says that this is a 3/4 heavy line? What does that mean exactly? What that means is by the grain weight standard. And so fly lines are measured in grains. And so when you're measuring things in grains, this isn't going to be grams or pounds or anything like that. Grains, for instance, bullets, for instance, are measured in grains. You have a 150 grain bullet, 160 grain bullet, whatever. It's a similar deal. I don't know if this, and I've never looked this up, so full confession, I do not have any idea if the grains in bullets are the same as the weight in fly lines. I have no idea about that. It would be really cool if they were, because that would make a lot of sense, but I don't really know if that's how that's done. But you can they used to sell grain scales where you could weigh the fly line and see what weight it was if you had one that was unlabeled. We don't really bother with that. Now there's, line IDs on the line where it actually has it printed on the fly line like what weight it is. So that makes it a lot easier. The actual weight of a fly line is established in the first 30 feet. So the first, like from the tip to 30 feet back, that is where it gains its actual title of a certain weight. It's got to weigh a certain amount of grains in that weight to be a 4 weight, a 5 weight, a 6 weight, and so forth. All those are different. So if you were to, I've got one running around here someplace, I think. Let me look here. I have a lot of fly lines up here, apologize. A bonefish line. This is a perfect example. I can switch this one out so y'all can see that. If you look at the package, on the bonefish line, it says true 2-weight line, right there above that little line diagram. You can see that. What that means is that this is actually, when you get a 6 weight, which is actually what's pictured here, if you flip that over, the number of grains that is on a scale, that is exactly a true 6 weight. So, and I know y'all can't read that, so I'll read this off, but on this is 160 grains for a 6 weight. That is a true 6 weight. That same line over here, that Grand Slam taper, this is a 3/4 line heavy, so not a full line weight heavy, but 3/4. So this is true, this is 3/4. A 6 weight in this weighs 180. So you're looking at, there is a jump between this. So a 180 grain is, you know, right at 3/4 because a true 7 weight is 185. Now, I know that sounds really confusing. The whole point is this. I see a lot of people ask these questions of, well, I have a 5 weight, but I just can't feel it load. Should I overweight it? Should I, get a 6 weight and put on it? Careful, because if you were to get like this line for say, if you were to do this, that's a 6 weight fly line on the box. But if you look, it says 1 size heavy. So this number here, this line's actually a true 7 weight. And so that's the thing that's really weird about it is if you were to overweight a line, for instance, here, you actually went another full weight overkill if you did that, which probably is going to affect the action of your fly rod and the casting performance in general. So you kind of need to know and read a little bit of this stuff before you make an informed purchase. And so if you have questions, obviously that's what we're here as a fly shop. We're here to answer those questions. So if you're like, I have no idea what to get, all I'm going to ask you is what rod are you using? Where are you using it? What is your goal? What are you trying to do? What type of fishing are you doing? I mean, is it bass fishing with, subsurface flies? Are we throwing poppers at lily pads? Are we trout fishing in the Rockies? And if you're trout fishing, is it dry fly fishing and nymphing, or are we going to be streamer fishing and fast current? Those are the things I need to know. And then I basically will whittle the selection down to 2 or 3 options at various price points, and you can make it happen. So, but if you were to look at a fly line that says that it is 1 full line size heavy, you don't need to overweight that. In some cases, on very, very lightweight fly rods, I'll actually underweight this to where it's actually the right taper, but it's true to grain weight for whatever application I'm looking for. So just be careful when you're doing this, and that's something that we're here for as a fly shop. We want to answer as many of those questions and pair this stuff correctly with what you're doing. I do have a question here from David. It says, in small streams around Texas in summer, hot weather, on a glass or soft 3 or 4 weight, what are the line options? And that's a great question. Hot weather, soft rod, and that's kind of been a tough scenario because a lot of lines, when you look at your Western fly lines, were made on multi-filament cores with moderate level temperature tolerance. That's why we made the Texas taper. And so when I came up with it, it was basically not going to the full tropical saltwater stiff goop. It was basically getting right in between those to where we had the pliability that everybody loves, but also some integrity in our Texas heat. So for 3 and 4 weight, the Texas taper is obviously the one that I throw the most. I'm partial to it. I'm the one that came up with it. But the whole point being is that my opinion may be a little biased, but that is the line that we are using. The reason it bears the moniker Texas is it was made for here by folks that fish here. And that's the thing that was really important to us, is to have something that would stand up to our Texas heat. But I just finished guiding with it in Colorado for 2 weeks, and I didn't have any memory problems, no issues, and it was a perfect trout line. And in creek scenarios with bow and arrow and roll casting and small stream environments, it's a dream. But if you're throwing, we took the same line and we were mousing, small ponds with it as well, and just had a great time. So, it did all things that we needed it to do without really fussing, and that's nice. So having a line that is not the one line to rule them all, so to speak, but it does a really good job in a wide variety of environments. Likewise, the line that I just showed, the creek trout there, that's a great line. It's a multi-filament core. It is a softer outer coating, and it's made for moderate to cooler temperatures. But moderate temperatures still pull you up into most of our temperature spectrum around Texas. Not to the hottest of hot, but it'll still do a great job. And if we're fishing creeks or shaded areas and things like that, we've had no issues, and they're pretty robust. But like a creek trout, an MPX, anything like that, those tapers do a very, very good job. And I know they're rated for, obviously cooler environments and things like that, or moderate environments. But the thing I would mention is that they can pull some double duty when you need them to. They don't totally, limp out in the heat. It's not gonna destroy the fly line by any means. They have a lot of integrity, and the cores are really true. The Texas taper just takes a similar type line, and there's some taper changes and some other feature changes, but I'd say the grand slam on that line, as far as I don't want to use that term just because we have another line that's called the grand slam, but if you were to look at like kind of the trifecta of the fact that it's got the right core, the right coating, and it's got the taper that we need here, that's what made the Texas taper so awesome. Now, in terms of we look at different tapers, and if I were to, and I know we'll go back to a lot of fly line boxes today, you're going to see this. Since we're here, we can just talk about it. This is the Texas taper. So if you were to look at this, how is this line tapered? What does it do? What is a taper? Why is this taper different than other ones? If I were to find one that was like dramatically different here, let's look at like a tarpon taper, for instance. So I want you to kind of look at this little diagram right here. See how it, the taper steps up, it loads pretty quickly, steps off, there's a little handling line at the end, and then you have all this running line that's for shooting purposes. Well, if you look at this, that taper is vastly more aggressive here at a tarpon line, where it steps up very immediately. There's not nearly as much of a presentation tip on it. It drops down towards the rear portion of the taper and then terminates into some running line. These are very, very different lines for very different applications. And so you have to look at, why are you using one over the other? So if you look at tapers, there are longer tapers and shorter tapers. Shorter tapers, more often than not, are made to basically send. They are typically made for that. There are some exceptions, and we'll talk about that, but normally those shorter shooting head tapers, they're going to be made for either distance or turning over large flies, even at close range. So you're looking at, take a bass bug taper, for instance. It's not the shortest of tapers, but it's big. It is a very, very bulky front taper. That is made for turning over large bass bugs, big weighted streamers, and doing so, right out the rod tip. You don't have to get a lot of line out to make that thing work. It can really be an amazing taper for even creek fishing. I use it a lot on Brushy Creek if I need something to really turn over a big bug in a close distance. But that line is, I think it's 2 line weights overweighted on that one. That's a lot of beef to be throwing in the air. So you have to really watch how you pair it with your rods. You might want to move down a full line weight in that. If it says 8 weight on the box, you're actually buying a 10 if it's 2 line weights over. So we have to really watch that. It'll load up in close, and that's what it's built for. But you do have to keep in mind that if you're throwing on a little bit softer rod, you might want to back off some just to suit what you're doing. And I know this is a lot of info, folks. I'm sorry. So hopefully, if there's questions, I'm seeing some other stuff here popping up. So if there's questions, just drop them in the chat. I will for sure answer them. But with this, when you're measuring against tapers, typically the longer tapers that are more gradual or more presentation focused, more delicate, they are made to be that stealth application. The shorter, more compact ones, they're there to do business and they're to send line. Like, you load it up, let her fly. That's it. And shooting tapers, you can throw them a very, very long way. Now, if you're looking at distance casting, there's kind of 2 different thoughts. There's the shooting method and the carrying method. So if you're casting at distance, carrying line is where you're actually keeping a lot of line in the air as we cast, where you're here and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait and you're there and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait and you're here, and it gets even longer and there, and it's just a lot of line in the air, and you're carrying it, and you have to manage it throughout the entire time. I enjoy casting, so I enjoy carrying line. The shooting method is where you get the head of the line out, you're in running line, you put one good haul and a send, it's out of there. I mean, it is moving. And so that is kind of the shooting method versus carrying. It's kind of the send it and forget it versus the let's manage our approach, carry it, and then let her fly. And both have their applications, even in a fishing scenario. So it is something to think about, that there's a lot of different methods to getting where you need to be, but there's also a lot of lines that make that happen, easier depending on what you're doing and what scenario you're fishing, whether it's tarpon, striper, jacks, redfish, sea trout, all that, bonefish. A bonefish line is not really a shooting line. It's really made to carry more. It has a very long taper to where you can actually manage line in the air and make those 60, 80-foot shots that are sometimes necessary, but without slapping a very heavy line down on these fish. But it will still turn over, a bead chained or small lead-eyed fly. Bead chain or lead-eyed fly, any of that would be fine as long as it's not too terribly bulky. If you're going to throw larger crab patterns and stuff like that for permit, the bonefish light might not be your choice. You might look at something like a Grand Slam, something that's got a little bit more aggressive front taper where it'll leverage over those heavier flies better. So just something to think about. As you make that taper bigger and bulkier, it will leverage over. It's got a lot more muscle to put flies where you need them. As you back off on those tapers and they become thinner and a little bit more gradual and longer, those are made to be more delicate. They also have a lot better application for mending. So if you're in a trout environment, you probably want something that has a little bit more what's called a belly on a fly line. So if we were to look at the anatomy of a fly line, and this is great, anytime you come to the shop, just pick up one of these boxes. It's so great. If you look at the back, it actually has the diagram, and I don't know if that'll show on camera. I'll see if this will do. I know that's probably not enough. Yeah, it's not going to quite show, but you can see like here, the actual diagram of the fly line itself. You'll see these little bitty pieces of text on the bottom here. That actually is kind of the anatomy of the fly line, if you will. So you'll see words like front taper, belly, rear taper, running line, all that sort of stuff that is mentioned there on that box. That just simply lets you know where does the line step up into that front taper. The belly is the section between those two tapers, the front and the rear tapers. So when you're looking at that belly section as it extends or decreases, that tells you a lot about how that line's going to perform, whether it is intended to really just leverage and go, or if it's really a more of a presentation-based line that's going to have a lot of control for you to mend. For instance, like the Scientific Angler Anadro. It's a great nymphing line, things like that. And because the taper is so long, you can have 40 feet of line out and just mend the whole thing. It's an easy line to work with on the water. Is it the best thing for, a shooting presentation? Absolutely not. But it's wonderful for leveraging over an actual indicator rig and sending that. Makes an incredible mousing line in Alaska. It's my favorite line to mouse with in Alaska. It just does such a good job because you can mend it, control it, skate mice, do all that sort of stuff. And even if you're using a floating line instead of a sinking line in Alaska, the Anadro is still my first choice. I love that. It performs flawlessly in cold water and cold weather, and it also does a great job of, since it does have such a swollen front taper on it, it's long, the actual taper and full head is very long, but since the front is a little bit more aggressive, it can be a cold water bass line when you need it. It's a great indicator fishing line. It's also a great line if you head to Alaska when you're looking at glacial melt streams that are stingingly cold, where you need that sort of, pliability and flexibility in a fly line. So just things to think about. I have another question here. Oh, okay, very good. Yeah. Somebody was just mentioning a line would be good for fishing the White River. So William was saying it would be great for a White River. Yeah, when you're looking at, for instance, anywhere in the South, if you've got hot weather but cold water, you can look at, tailwaters like the Lower Mountain Fork and even the Guadalupe River. You're looking at that water still, if you're at the dam, it's in the upper 50s, and then when you fish the lower portions of the fishery, or mid portions of the fishery anyway, it can still be in the mid 60s. That's cooler water for, down here, obviously. But when you head, up into Arkansas and things like that, those, the White, Norfolk, all those tailwater fisheries, water's cold, air is hot. So having a line that can kind of be an equal opportunity employer on both of those things and just kind of adapt to whatever condition you are faced with is very, very helpful. So yeah, that's a great point. Let's go through just some fly lines and some different things here on kind of different types. And we're going to talk about series here. So let's kind of start at the base and work our way up. So here we have a Scientific Angler air cell. This is just a very affordable basic line. And I want you to pay attention here. It's got a welded loop, but it doesn't have AST, it doesn't have AST plus. This is more of a budget conscious fly line that has some durability to it. It's going to have a great taper, going to be very all-purpose, just general floating line for, the introductory angler. And that's kind of what you're looking at there. So the air cell is going to come in that. If you were to buy the sinking version of it, it's going to actually be called the wet cell. And when they do a sink tip and a sinking line, in the wet cell as well. These are the more affordable, they're kind of basic in terms of fly lines, but they're affordable, they're easy to deal with, and you kind of know what you're getting straight out the package. It's just kind of a no frills, but good durability, very good castability, but without the major price tag. So that's something, if you're getting into that, the air cell and wet cell is kind of where you begin. If you transition over to the frequency lines, they make, they come with AST, which you'll see there on the box. You can see the little emblem there. They've got welded loops and AST. So AST is advanced shooting technology, and they come in all different weights and tapers. They make a sink tip, they make an MPX. You can even get, I think I've got another one over here. You can also get a saltwater in it as well. So the frequency series, still budget conscious, very robust, great tapers, and some of these are some of their well-known tapers, like the MPX, for instance. The MPX is one of the best tapers that they've ever come up with, and one of the crowd favorites in store as well. The thing about the MPX that's so nice is it does play nice in multiple environments when it comes to, it's called MPX, stands for multi-presentation, so MP is multi-presentation. And the GPX, which was its predecessor, was the general presentation. So you're looking at this one, doesn't have as much kick as the old GPX did. I think it's a little bit more presentation driven, which is something I think was a really nice add. But you will see the MPX taper all throughout the Scientific Angler lineup, including in the frequency, which is a little bit more budget conscious way to get into it. Once you move up from there, you will notice you start getting into the Mastery series, and there's fresh and saltwater versions of each of those. If you will notice, you start seeing things like Tropicore, line IDs, welded loops, and AST. So you start to see that a little bit more on the Mastery series, where you're going to see a few more technologies. There's going to be a lot more applications and things like that, because the series tend to kind of widen a little bit as you elevate in price and technology. So the Mastery is another great place to live if you are budget conscious. Moving on from there, in the floating arenas, you're going to have the Amplitude Smooth. Amplitude series is literally where you run into AST Plus. And AST Plus is simply that additive we talked about earlier, that additive actually migrates out of the fly line to the outer surface of the fly line to keep it refreshed the entire time throughout the entire lifespan of the line. So durability on these, we get asked all the time, like how long do they last? Not entirely sure. We're having a really hard time wearing them out in a timely fashion. So things like the creek trout, which I just showed, is a great line for around here for tight creeks, and it's a wonderful roll casting line. The bonefish taper, if you're going to travel and do any bone fishing, I always have one of these in my arsenal, especially if we wind up with flat calm days or very low wind days where I need presentation at the forefront of what I'm doing. Again, a true to grain weight line. It's a rarity to find that in a saltwater arena. If you look at the Texas taper, I'm not going to belabor that point. You'll notice there's a few extra technologies in it. It's the same price as all the other ones, but we've added a camo tip. We also have the dry tip technology, which is really cool. And we also have the floating texture only on the front part. So even though it's a smooth line, it has a textured tip, which causes it to float a little bit higher. The other fun fact, it is the only fly line in scientific angler history that has a Rio Grande cichlid on the back of the box, which I'm going to mention this because it's super cool. We take, on the back of the box, if you read about it, it actually mentions that we give money back to conservation through the sale of Fly Fish the Republic merchandise. That includes the Texas taper. We were actually able to fund a conservation project. It's actually going to be more of a study project. Somebody reached out to us and mentioned that they were doing a cichlid genome project to actually form the entire genomic structure for the Hyrictus family of cichlids, which that is what a Rio Grande cichlid is, and they're going to use it to do the basis of that. We were able to fund that entire project through sales of Fly Fish the Republic merchandise here in store. So we got to cut a several $1,000 check right to that project to go into scientific on-the-ground work that's going to spearhead more projects and more study for species like the Rio Grande cichlid that we love so much and care for so much around here in the hill country. So just think of it this way. You've supported conservation every time you bought a Texas taper. So really cool to be able to fully fund projects that are groundbreaking projects that have never been done before. And we're just selling fly lines, folks. It's pretty cool. So neat to see that. I keep doing that. I keep hitting the wrong button. I apologize, y'all. But nonetheless, it's really cool to see that we have, this sort of, kind of conservation driver just from, you know, doing business. So it's really fun. But the Texas taper, a great one for all of Texas. If you find yourself down in the tropics and you're going to be down tarpon fishing, look at the difference in this taper. That's a much more swollen taper. It's going to be heavier, it's stouter, made for punching into heavy winds, decent distances, and turning over larger, you know, 3 and 4/0 hooks that you will occasionally run into in the tarpon arena. And this is something I really want to bring up here because this is near and dear to us. We love red fishing on our Texas coast. It is absolutely a blast. I love catching redfish, and I love fishing for sea trout as well. But I think that we run into this a lot, and that is we carry a redfish warm water and a redfish cold water line. They are both, if you look at this, they're both a half size heavy. They're the same exact taper, but one's warm and one's cold. If you will look, and I don't know if I can show both of this, one of these things, when you see these, when you look on the back of the box here, these are going to have different, they've got the cores and whatnot. This is a Tropicore, and then I want to say that on this one, they mentioned this all the way down, because this one, what's funny about it is I don't know if they actually mentioned this on the back. I'm going to look at this. I know I'm giving you a blank screen here. But the warm water line is going to have this stiffer jacket, stiffer core, the cold water one, and I think that this, they just used a redfish box. I don't think they actually mentioned it here on the icon, but nonetheless, this is it says the Tropicore, but if you look in the fine print, it says warm only. So even though you see it on both boxes, the other one is a multi-filament core. So the cold water box is going to have it's going to have the same icons, but just realize that there's fine print under it. But the cold water line is built on a multi-filament core and is going to be suited for cooler environments. The warm water one's going to be boat deck, summer, that sort of stuff that we run into down on the flats a lot. The cold water one's especially important in Louisiana as well, where you run into these really big redfish in the winter months. So something to think about, that literally, even though they've got icons in the box, sometimes they have fine print. But yeah, I looked at that, I was like, that doesn't have a Tropicore, that is a multi-filament core. So I read too many catalogs, but that's part of it. The Amplitude Smooth is basically the AST Plus in a smooth finish fly line. That's it. When you move to Amplitude Textured, there's similar tapers. There's also some tapers that don't come back and forth, where you can't buy them in one, or you can't buy them in both. It's one or the other. But for the most part, a lot of their popular tapers will come in a smooth and a textured. So just to kind of look at a few of those, one of my absolute favorites is the Grand Slam taper. I think this thing just does the job almost everywhere I take it. And the fact of the matter is, it actually can double as a summertime hot weather bass line. Like if I'm out on the Colorado River in the summer or something like that, you can just bake out there, man, or on the Brazos. I mean, it's hot. And I mean, you're baking, the line's on the boat deck. It's gonna really need a stiffer core and things like that to perform. And that's one of the beautiful things about this, is it can double duty as a bass line when you need it. The Grand Slam, however, I mean, obviously it's kind of a mashup of a bonefish and a tarpon line that will do all of that. So I think as far as like permit tarpon, probably a better line overall. And if it's windy condition bonefish, which tends to be anytime I bonefish, it's blowing 30. I don't know what I have the worst track record for like wind on the Texas coast. If I go to the Texas coast, it's going to blow 30 every single time. Very rare are the days that I see it smooth. But nonetheless, this line does an amazing job in windier conditions and driving heavier flies to the target. If you look at, you know, things like this, again, is a trout taper. It is a true to line weight, or true to weight line. So if you are fishing softer rods, fiberglass, things like that, a lot of times these lines will really come in handy if you're going to make longer casts. If you're fishing those rods in shorter, tighter conditions, the true to line weight thing's not necessarily as important as if you're reaching out to longer distances. But a true to line weight line is going to be much more presentation focused. This is your technical dry fly line, is what that is. And it is a wonderful, wonderful line, and I highly recommend it, but do be aware that these sometimes take a little bit more skill to cast, in the fact that they don't load the rod as immediately as a lot of the modern tapers that are going to be a little beefier, a little stouter. These true to line weight lines, you are getting exactly what you think you are. When a 4-weight's on the box, a 4-weight's what you got. It's not going to be a 4.5 or a 5. Now, in taper, there's also one little wild card that I'm going to mention. You'll notice all the rest of these boxes, so if we were to look at this, This one says WF-4-F. That's a weight forward 4-weight floating line. Well, if you look at the next box, it's DT-2-F. The DT is double taper, where literally there's a midpoint on the line and the line is tapered exactly the same in either direction. It is made for the softest of presentations, the absolute most stealth, and kind of close environments. However, it does load up pretty well in close. It does a pretty good job, but it's not going to be a long distance line. This is a super delicate, close quarters, really, really fun line to fish with from a mending perspective, because you can mend the whole line really, really easily. But if you're fishing like the spookiest of trout in the tightest of places, or demanding sunfish in a clear stream that they can see you from a mile away, and you're trying to sneak in there in your camouflage and have a light presentation, the double taper is actually a really fun line to cast. The other thing is there's some economy to it. When you wear the one side of the line out, which in an AST Plus line is going to take you a hot minute, but when you do that, you can literally come back into the shop, we'll unspool the line and flip it over for you, because both lines are identical. So you can actually, both sides of the line are identical, where you can now fish both sides, and it lasts every bit as long times two. So if you wear out this side, you just flip it over to that side and you just restarted the clock. So we stretch it out, put it back on the reel, and you got twice the life. We only carry this in I think a 2 and a 3 weight, because it's really the only real applications we would need it for around here is some of the more delicate, close range stuff, whether it be here in the hill country or in the mountains with trout. One of my all-around favorite warm water tapers. I want you to look at this taper too. It's super cool. You've got this, major camo tip on it that's really swollen, kind of that, Titan taper-esque, where they put this real aggressive front taper on there to make this line turn over major bass bugs. And if you will look, it is 2 line weights heavy. So that line is actually a 10 weight. So if you have a softer 8 weight, I don't think I would buy the 8 weight for it. When I'm actually, when I'm doing rods that I know that they like a little bit more true to grain weight lines, I actually will step this down a line weight or 2 for my rods, just so it's a little bit more, matching apples to apples. I don't always need that extra leverage. On super fast action rods and stuff that we bass fish with, that they're a little bit more pool cue-ish, if you will, this line can be matched weight to weight. So fast action rods, I don't have a problem with that. They can take it. But the more moderate action rods, I would suggest actually dropping down a line weight in this one. This thing is like the trick shot line of the century. You can make awesome curve casts and really leverage some big bass bugs into some really tight places. And this is a unique line in the fact that it has a warm weather, like a saltwater jacket, if you will, like a tropical jacket on a multi-filament core. So the core is limp, the jacket is stiffer. So it's really kind of a neat hybrid all the way around. So it will perform in southern heat and demanding conditions with big flies. We mentioned this line just a minute ago with that anadromous indicator line. Just an amazing, amazing line. You'll notice the taper on it is very, it swells up quickly and it's very long. It's a 1.5 size heavy line, so be aware of that. It's made to turn over bigger things and indicator rigs and all that sort of stuff. Just be aware of it. It's going to be heavy. So if you're using this on like a, for instance, if you had a 6-weight rod that was like a dry fly 6-weight, I would bump this down to at least a 5. Because it's that's at that point you're only going to be a half line weight heavy, which is going to perform a little better. But nonetheless, if you have a fast action rod, that's what this is for. That's why they made it to where you can leverage over bigger rigs, bigger flies, and it works as a wintertime bass line. I've fished it in creek conditions and I've fished it in open water conditions, and it does great. In fact, I think they even mentioned that. I don't know if they do on the back. No, it's funny. They mentioned that you can fish poppers and big dries on this thing, but you don't really fish poppers a whole lot for trout, steelhead, or salmon. You can get away with, poppers for, coho salmon, but that's kind of it. But I mean, I'm like, why'd you put poppers on there? If it'll throw a popper, that means I get to use it for bass. So just be aware of that. If you turn the backs of these lines over, a lot of times you will see that information. Now, we're going to move into one last floating line before we kind of get into another subject entirely, and that's sinking lines. So if we were to look at what I would say is kind of the latest, greatest from Scientific Angler, it's these magnitude lines. And they're actually, the coatings are different. They actually have a clear tip that floats. And a clear floating line has kind of been the one that has been the Enigma. I've cast a few of them, and man, I'll be honest, I was pretty unimpressed with a lot of yesteryear's clear floaters. But these are amazing. They do an incredible job, and you can get them in a full clear. You can also get them in a clear tip, and now they're even making some trout versions of this that can be fished in cold water conditions as well. So this is kind of their latest greatest, where it's actually got a floating clear tip on it that will allow you to use shorter leaders in areas that, you know, the trout are really spooky or the fish are really spooky in a saltwater environment for tarpon, bonefish, things like that. You don't have to throw these massive, 12-foot long leaders. You can use a clear fly line now and keep your leaders significantly shorter. The one thing I will mention is that tracking your fly is a little bit harder with a clear tip, because when you physically know where the fly line ends because it just runs out of color and you're used to seeing that, well, you've got, a clear tip on the end of this that you've got to account for as well when you're tracking flies. So just be aware of that. But these are really cool. This is an infinity. So this is actually a medium temp line for a freshwater application. This really gained popularity in the saltwater world, is where they came out with it first, for tarpon and bonefish, permit, things like that. And that's where they were doing more like the Grand Slam tapers, tarpon tapers, stuff like that. But there is a freshwater and a saltwater version of this now for your casting pleasure whenever you want it. Now, let me do a quick comment check here. Pat Vanek is lighting me up. He says he's been fishing that line for over 30 years and it works. I would say so, and you've got the experience to back it, sir. I love it. And oh yeah, he says easiest one to cast streamers in Texas for bass. He said just his 2 cents, but his 2 cents is actually worth probably a little bit more than that, because he's earned the right to be heard on one of my favorite bass fisheries in the entire state. So on the sinking line front, and I love this. I'm going to pull a couple of lines out here that are going to confuse everyone, which is great. I think this is a lot of fun. So you'll notice this is WF-8-S, and then you have WF-462-S. We don't have a 462 weight fly rod, thank God, because that thing would be about as big around as a skyscraper, and that's hard to cast. So with this, we have to look at what are we doing with these lines, and why are they labeled so differently, and what is going on here. So sinking lines. A good friend of mine who is no longer with us, Joe Robinson, put it this way, and I think it's probably one of the truest statements I've ever heard in all of fly line discussion, and that is, most fly anglers would rather eat dirt than cast a sinking line. And that proved to be the truth in the olden days, where you had sinking lines that did not have real progressive tapers. They were weighted very poorly. When they sink, they would sag, so you get this really nasty like belly in the line. They wouldn't sink evenly, so you'd miss strikes. They weren't sensitive. They just sucked. They were bad. I owned an old one that I remember specifically. I owned a lot of sinking lines, but there was one that it might have been the first sinking line I ever bought, and I hated it. I bought it. I think I fished it one time. And part of that was because it was just such an absolute pain to use. Now we have lines that are actually tapered, like a lot of our floating line equivalents. The other thing that's really neat about them is they're actually pretty darn easy to cast and a pleasure to use. So we'll get back to this 462 in a minute. But if you look at this, this is a seamless density. And you'll see all the technologies and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. But the thing about the seamless density that's so awesome is they impregnate these lines with tungsten powder. And that tungsten powder is what causes the line to sink. Putting more of it in places and less of it in places actually evens out how the line sinks. So think about it. If you were to put goop on a fly line with the same amount of tungsten all the way throughout, well, there's portions of that fly line that are thicker and bigger. There's portions of it that are thinner and longer. You don't need as much tungsten back here to sink a thin line. You need that up here because the water resistance of a larger diameter line is going to take more tungsten to get that tip section to really sink at the rate you want. The little stuff, the super thin stuff, takes almost none. It doesn't have near the water resistance compared to the front taper. Now, that being said, they now can graduate those densities. In the olden days, that didn't really happen much. So now the seamless density, when you throw that line in the water and it hits, it sinks in a really, really straight line. And so from the angler, it may sink like this, but it's going to sink very, very evenly to where you don't have that nasty, bend or sag in the line that causes you to miss strikes. And so that's the main thing, is I really want people to know getting a sinking line straight really helps you on just your tactile reference of strikes, and when you contact the bottom or any sort of cover. Having that ability to do that is just imperative to me. This is my favorite general purpose sinking line. I absolutely love the seamless density. It isn't the best in the hottest of hot conditions, but normally I'm fishing a little bit more, topwater oriented stuff. I will admit it does get a little gummy on the hottest of days on a boat. From a wading perspective, I don't usually have a problem with it because the running line that I'm stripping into the water cools down. So I've not had any issues there. Really, on a boat deck when it's baking, it can get a little bit soft. But for most of the time when I'm fishing spring, fall, and winter, I don't have an issue with this line, and it is such a fun line to fish. For trout in flowing water, and if you're in really, really heavy rivers, it's a great one. But if you'll notice sinking lines, I don't know if you can see this, you probably can't, but right here, it says S5, S7. So we have an 8-weight line, but it has 2 different sink rates on it. It means that the front of the line sinks at roughly 7 inches a second. A type 7 is sink 7 is roughly 7 inches, sink 5 is roughly 5. It's pretty darn close. Not exact, but it's close. And so you're looking at 7 and 5. That thicker section of that fly line needs that sink 7 to get down. The sink 5 just needs to be able to follow that 7 in just almost like it's in formation, where you're just basically the front taper is sinking. This thing's right there in line, but it doesn't need the amount of tungsten to make it happen. And so that's what the seamless density does. It's an incredible line, my all-around favorite full sink line, where it sinks from tip to end. It's just awesome. It works great. Now, what is this all about? What is this thing? This 462 something going on. And then this is really weird. It says cut to adjust weight. So when you run into environments, and I think this is even weirder, this is kind of fun. If you were to look at this, where you've got different cores, that looks like the same line. Weight forward, 462, sink. That 462 is grains, which, by the way, 462 is massive. That is humongous. That is a giant, giant line. I don't have a true to grain weight line around here at the moment, but if you were to look at that, I mean, we were just mentioning that I think it was 160 grains or whatever was a bonefish. You're looking at 462, you start doing some math, that gets up there pretty quickly. So in this case, what we have here is the same line, but one is a 3D custom tip. This is a tropical jungle custom tip. All that means, this one, Tropicore, that one, not. This is a multi-filament, that's tropical. What's cool about that is when you are in environments like, say, you need a deep saltwater line in the cooler months. Now you have something that is a multi-filament core that sinks like mad. It will get down, that has an intermediate running line and a very, very, I think it's like a 30-foot roughly sink head on the front that you cut back to the length that you want to achieve the grain weight. You're like, well, how much do I know to do? How do I cut that? On the back, it tells you how much to cut off the tip of the line to make it a certain grain weight, which is awesome, because if you have a line, for instance, that you're like, man, I really love the Grand Slam taper on this rod. Well, the one that I'm throwing is 185 grains. Well, can I get that out of this? Probably not, because this is made for the bigger stuff. If you're gonna go for 9 weights, 10 weights, stuff like that, where it's really, really big, this is what this is made for, is kind of a big water, big fish, like open lake striper, stuff like that. But you're looking at like a 7 to 8 weight at 254, sure, it's gonna be overweighted, but you can throw it for striper or anything like that, or big bass on our lakes. So fishing Lake Travis, fishing Lake Buchanan, fishing Canyon Lake, anything like that, great line for that, because it's gonna have a very fast sinking tip, intermediate running line, and a multi-filament core. If you want to do the same thing in the heat of the summer, you can match that line exactly with a different core. So that's what's really cool about these, is they're customizable, and they're not measured in weight, they're measured in grains. And then you just look at the back of the box and see where you want to fall in that grain scale. So really kind of a neat way of doing it. And one of the lines that I think is the most adaptable for anywhere, that basically you can match it for hot and cold. So if you have a rod that you're like, I know it likes throwing 210 grain lines, awesome. you can probably make that happen somewhere in this arena or somewhere really close. Might be a little bit bigger than that, but you can get really, really close here. So just kind of something to think about if you're trying to mix and match lines to do things like that. Now, we also have lines that are labeled differently where it's a -I. So you see WF-8-I. The -I stands for intermediate. And intermediate sinks at about 1 inch to 1.5 inches a second. These lines I actually really like for fishing. This is the saltwater intermediate specifically. I like this line a lot for the Texas coast, specifically the surf. The surf, I can actually use that intermediate line to get down below the waves to where that wave action's not pulling my line up and down while I'm retrieving a fly through the surf. And I like that a lot. The other thing it's also very useful for is if you're off the edges of deeper flats and you need a little bit more depth than what you're getting out of a standard floating line, that intermediate line will really help that be accomplished in a way that's actually really fun to cast. Let me see here. On this one, I know the seamless density, they base that one off of their MPX taper. And what's really cool about that is the taper that we all kind of know and love, that we fish a lot, that MPX taper, to have a sinking line that is basically tapered the same way, but it's going to feel a little bit different, is really nice because now it has the castability that we would expect out of one of our favorite tapers. Now, I'm going to complicate life again. What about this? We've got a 5-weight intermediate, but we also over here have an 8-weight intermediate. So I know that those are not quite perfectly in frame. There we go. It's close-ish. But you're looking at, one's a saltwater intermediate. This has Tropicore on it. This one is a freshwater intermediate. It's a stillwater series. A lot of those were made for stillwater trout fishing, but I use those quite a bit around the hill country in the cooler months. This is a Clearwater camo line that actually, I'll see if I can get this to show on camera here. We'll pull it out of the box. But if you look, it's actually got this really cool, like clear coffee color to it. Very, very useful line for very finicky fish in clear water in the early spring months or even in winter. And it's also kind of fun because if the line is sinking, it blends into the backdrop exceptionally well. And I find that to be a very great line overall for just stealth presentations, whether it be on Brushy Creek or, you know, I use it a lot on the San Gabriel because that San Gabriel gets clear in the winter. But that's a great line to use in those situations. In fact, the biggest bass I ever caught on Brushy Creek on fly was actually using this line. It was early spring. Saw it up shallow, was able to make the cast, it didn't spook, and if it swims under the line for any reason, it doesn't typically line the fish. Very, very useful line in those cool water environments, especially if you need that little extra added edge. Now, if you have the last two that we'll talk about, this is a floating intermediate, where this is your standard Grand Slam, but it has a clear tip on the end of it, to where that last little bit of the line actually is clear, but it sinks ever so slightly. So if you need a little bit more depth on like shallow grass and things like that on flats for the Texas coast, that's a great line where you can, like, you know, fish the potholes with it and fish the grass edges, and it gets down just a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. And that the rest of the taper and the running line all float. So it's going to hold that, you know, fly up suspended. You're not going to have to worry about getting deep, deep, deep in the grass or things like that. So you can kind of regulate that depending on what fly you intend to use. Another one that you have to look at is where you have a float sink. And that's where you have a true sink tip. This is actually, I think, the most user-friendly sink tip I've ever thrown in my life. That Trout Express is such an easy line for any people. Like, I'm talking anybody, any skill level can throw this line just super, super easily. And it comes in grain weights, but if you'll notice, if you flip the box over, it will tell you that on a 210, it's going to recommend a 6-7, and that's where it's going to kind of live in the sinking line. Very unique taper. It seems really, really strange when you see it like that, and mind you, this is going to be stretched out over multiple feet. It doesn't look like there's a bulb in the middle of the line when you strip it off, but that's the entire point, is it's going to leverage these flies over really well. That sink section stays a little bit smaller, so it gets down really quickly. But this line here, that Trout Express, I wish they wouldn't have put trout on it just because everybody thinks it's a trout line. We use that for so many warm water applications right here in the hill country. So it's an amazing line. Sonar lines are the SA sinking series. And the thing that's really important about that is noticing that, like, the intermediate lines, they're just going to sink very, very soft. They don't really need the whole like major tungsten impregnation and all that to get those real fast sink rates that you're going to see in those other lines. But you're going to notice that sink 1, sink 2, sink 3, you know, different sink rates, that's roughly inches a second. Anything that has multiple sink rates, because they have like They had a triple density line for a while that was running triple densities all the way through that. I don't think we carry that one in store anymore, but nonetheless, great line. They made it in an I-3.5 and a 3.57 and all these different sink rates to get down at different rates depending on the water you're fishing. So thinking about it this way, if you're in a lake, the water is still. It just becomes a matter of counting the line down to getting it where you need it. However, in a fast-flowing river, you have to think about it this way. You make a cast, your line immediately begins traveling downriver with all that current. So a type 3 is gonna have a little bit more water trying to lift it up to the surface. You might need to do something like a 5 or a 7 to punch down into very deep current and to keep that fly in front of those fish in the strike zone. So depending on how fast the water is, you might need to overcompensate on the sink rate versus what you would use in a still water environment. So just things to think about when selecting a sinking line. Now, I will take some questions because that's a lot of information, and while I'm setting up here, if anybody's got any questions, I got a couple other things I'm going to let y'all use as a resource here. Being that we are a dealer, we have a dealer catalog, I would highly encourage y'all to scan that QR code. This takes you right to Scientific Angler's YouTube site, and you'll basically get a crash course in what makes up a fly line, how are they built, how do they work, all that sort of thing. So I'll keep this up there for just a couple more seconds. I was able to scan that. Somebody try that that's on here right now, and let me know if that works for you guys. That will let me know if it works or doesn't, and I'll amend my presentation accordingly. But I tried it this morning and it worked fine, so I was wanting to see if that worked for anybody. Let me know if the links work. Somebody in the chat, hop in there and let me know. But this one's one about basically what makes up Scientific Angler's fly line coating. It talks about all that. And then I think I can flip this guy over. There's one on cores. So if you wanted to do that QR code there, just you can scan that, take a picture of it and use it later, whatever you want to do. But it takes you directly to their YouTube channel that basically will walk you through some of their opinions on what they do and how they do it. And I think that's a really good thing. Okay, Daniel, thank you. It does work. That's awesome. So yeah, those two, this is on cores. For those that didn't scan that yet, it's there. And then this one is on coatings. So I would highly advocate y'all watch those. They have some funny videos and stuff like that on there as well. They did some comical little advertising stuff back in the day. But all these are just factual, just what makes it up, very no-nonsense approach to it. I think some of these are like 2 and 3 minutes versus the hour that we've spent here on fly lines. So just wanted to make those available to y'all in case you were interested in watching some more. That'll at least get you to their YouTube channel to watch all that. So thank y'all for the ones that chimed in and said that it worked. I appreciate that. So hopefully y'all can utilize those in the future as well. Any questions on fly lines? There's a lot of different ones out there, as you full well know. We didn't even go through all that we carry here. This is just a portion of the lines that we carry. If I were to boil it down to just the absolute simplest form, what rod do you own? Is it fast action, moderate action, slow action? We're going to ask that the second you come in the shop and you're looking for a new fly line. What are you doing with it? So are you going to be fishing in Colorado, Texas, freshwater, saltwater, wherever? We want to know that. So rod, what are you doing? So really, where are you going? Then what are you doing? If you're in, Texas, and you need an 8 weight, so you got a moderate action 8 weight, and you're looking at going bass fishing in the winter. Okay, now I'm going to start looking at what depth are we fishing at? Are we going to be sinking lines, floating lines? Looking at that, we're also looking at hot and cold weather. So it's where, what, when, and how. Those are the things that we're going to be doing to solve those problems in fly lines. So, what are you throwing it on? So like it's what are you using? What are you fishing for? When are you fishing for it? How are you fishing for it? If you were kind of looking at that, those are kind of the situations that we use to kind of isolate fly lines. Let's see. Do I use a different line for practicing versus fishing? Yes and no. I will cast all the different tapers on the grass. I have no problem getting more used to it. However, when I practice, I do use a what's called an expert distance line. It's a 120-foot long fly line. Not one that I would typically fish with, but it's basically a really, really long trout taper. It's a true to grain weight line. It is obviously a different taper than that, but it's true to grain weight, more elongated, more based on that. And you can throw it an awful long way. I mean, I've emptied the line off of 6 and 7 weights quite frequently. But that being said, that's a line that I use to practice with because it's true to grain weight. It helps me with my loops. I'm not really fighting the line itself. But if you want to become more familiar with certain fly lines, fish them, but you can also practice with them a little bit on the grass and make sure you're getting your target practicing down and things of that sort. So like when we did the Texas taper stuff, I cast a Texas taper on the grass for a long time to make sure that it did what I wanted it to do, that I could roll cast with it, I could do aerial mins with it, I could single hand spay cast with it. I wanted to make sure it did all of that well, and if it didn't, we would have gone back and readdressed some taper issues. But thankfully, first one out the gate actually did what I needed it to do, which was really helpful. So very, very good questions. Anybody else before we wrap up today? I know we've got a lot of people on here, and the good news is that it's almost done. So y'all can go about, I think we've got some big college games today, and I don't watch college football, so I don't really care, but y'all have fun with that. We've got a Labor Day sale at the fly shop today, so I know that's going to date this video a little bit, but I don't care. It's my video, so it's all good. And then dove season opens on Monday, so all is well. So it's a good time, and our water conditions are great right now, so for anybody that hasn't been out, you really should go out and check it out. Like Brushy Creek's great. San Gabriel's really coming into its own after the flood, and we've had lots of other great reports off the Llano and the San Marcos all around the hill country. It's been really, really fun. A bunch of folks fished Salado Creek last weekend. Heard some good reports out of that. So highly encourage you to get out and explore. Go try out your fly lines. If you own a bunch of different ones, take a few different reels with you. If you got 2 or 3 different 5 weights, try those on different rods. And I will mention this as well. I have taken like top of the line, like, $130, $100 fly lines and put them on $1,000 fly rods. I'm kind of like, I don't like this rod so much. Only to switch fly lines and I fall in love with the rod. It can make that much of a difference. So just because it says it's great, come by the shop, see if we've cast it on the rod that you own. See if we've cast it on a rod similar to that. We'll tell you, hey, this is maybe not the best idea for this rod. It doesn't like, overweighted lines. It likes stuff that's a little bit more true to grain weight. You might look at that. And the other beautiful part about that is too, that, we've probably got experience with all of them. And in the event that we don't, we can at least get you really close based on your rod alone. Even if we don't have experience with that one line on that one rod, we'll have experience with that line on rods that are in that class. So something to kind of note when you come to a shop. What are some signs that your line needs to be replaced? That's a great question. Clean fly lines make the difference. Clean them often, clean them regularly. You can't clean them too much. Just good, a warm water with a dish rag will get all the grit and grime off of it. That's really helpful. And then taking a dedicated line cleaner. Scientific Angler makes a line cleaner that's all their own. Loon also makes several. They've got Line Speed. They've actually got line cleaners that don't have floating agents in them so that you can use them on sinking lines. That's kind of helpful. So there's all sorts of different line cleaners out there and line tools. I would just say use them and use them often. It really does help. And that's just something that keeping those lines clean is important. You'll notice the line begins to discolor, kind of looks like it's got grime all over it. Also, if a line is very old and needs to be replaced, you're going to start seeing cracking in the outer coating where it's had enough UV damage and stretch and stuff like that over the years that it's time to call it a day with that one. I would say 2 to 3 years is maximum life on most fly lines under moderate usage. You can get more out of that if you're rotating lines or switching lines. I've probably got some fly lines in my arsenal that are 5 years old or maybe longer, but I don't use them often. I just go, take those tarpon fishing or something, or I'm going to go, do deep lakes in the winter. Those are lines that come on for certain situations. I'm not leaving them on day in, day out. Your principal fly line, like if you've got one, weight forward floating line, 2 to 3 years is probably a pretty good window to think about when you need to be replacing it if you are fishing, moderately to often. So kind of something to think about there. Good question. All right, I think we're good. I don't see any more questions. I will leave y'all to your long weekend. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Very much appreciate it. And if there's any questions continuing, just drop them in the comments on this. Would love to do whatever we can to help answer questions. Call the shop, reach out, contact us. We have a lot of fly lines up here. And I don't brand bash, that's not me, but I will tell you this, if you're gonna buy a fly line, make sure it's got that logo on it. So what I will do is brand endorse. I won't brand bash, but I will tell you that having cast almost all the others in some form or fashion, This brand has left me wanting nothing, and I think it's left others wanting. And the other thing that I would mention, I'll do this in closing here. You want to learn more about AST Plus, there's your code right there. So, I mean, we're talking like, it's insane. I mean, you can see even the text there, 8 times longer of just lasting average and 5 times less friction than competitors' fly lines. That's a pretty major stat. So really would encourage you, hit that QR code, reference some of that stuff, learn as much as you can about these lines and what makes them great. And we will do everything we can to match the proper fly line with your fly rod to send you out in the right conditions and make the job happen on the water. Thank y'all so much for watching. Tune in next time. And again, if you have any questions, reach out through email or through the comments, or you can call us directly, reach us out on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, all that sort of good stuff. And we will be here when you got questions. Thank y'all so much, and we'll see you next time.